Earth was not the same planet it had been 3,000 years ago. The blue marble floating in space now looked like a giant garden filled with green forests, crystal clear rivers and cities that looked more like parks than urban centers. Humanity had forgotten what war meant. Violence was something they only read about in old dusty books kept in museums. Dongmin woke up that morning, just like any other day. He stretched his arms and looked out of his window at the beautiful sunrise painting, the sky in soft orange and pink colors. His house was made of living wood that grew into the shape they needed, and flowers bloomed naturally on the walls. His wife Hyejin was already awake, tending to their small garden where she grew vegetables and herbs that could cure any illness. Their daughter, So-young, was practicing her morning meditation in the backyard. She was 20 years old but looked younger because humans now lived much longer and aged more slowly. Peace had been good to the human body and mind. So-young was studying ancient philosophy and spent most of her time learning about the old ways when humans used to solve problems with something called fighting. Dong-min worked as a keeper of old knowledge. His job was to take care of books and records from the time before the Great Peace. Most humans found these old stories strange and hard to believe. Stories about humans hurting other humans seemed like fairy tales about monsters that never really existed. The weapons described in these books looked like toys compared to the tools humans use now for building and healing. That morning started differently, though. The sky began to make loud rumbling sounds like thunder, but there were no storm clouds. Hyejin looked up from her plants and pointed at the sky where dark shapes were appearing. The shapes grew bigger and bigger until everyone could see they were huge ships made of black metal. The ships were enormous, much larger than anything humans had ever built. They looked angry and dangerous, with sharp edges and red lights that blinked like evil eyes. When the ships landed in the fields outside the city, the ground shook and trees fell over. Heavy doors opened with hissing sounds and strange creatures walked out. These aliens were called the Vrak, and they looked nothing like humans. They were tall as two men standing on top of each other with thick, scaly skin that was dark green and brown. Their heads were shaped like dragons with glowing red eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. They wore metal armor that covered their whole bodies and carried weapons that hummed with dangerous energy. Commander Vex was their leader, and he was the biggest and scariest of all the Vrak. He had scars all over his face and arms from many battles. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. When he spoke, his breath came out like steam from his mouth. He had conquered 47 worlds before coming to Earth and had never met anyone who did not fear him. But something very strange happened when the Vrak arrived. The humans did not run away screaming. They did not hide in their houses or call for help. Instead, they walked toward the aliens with curious faces and warm smiles. Children ran up to the giant scary creatures and asked if they wanted to play adults, offered the aliens food and water, and asked if they had traveled. Dongmin was one of the first humans to reach the landing site. He walked right up to Commander Vex, who was twice as tall as him, and pointed a plasma rifle at his chest. Dongmin smiled and bowed politely the way humans always greeted strangers. Then he did something that made the alien commander take a step backward. Dongmin offered him a cup of hot tea. The tea was served in a beautiful ceramic cup with flowers painted on it. The steam rising from the hot liquid smelled like jasmine and honey. Commander Vex stared at the cup like it was some kind of weapon he had never seen before. His red eyes looked confused and his grip on his rifle loosened. Other humans gathered around the Vrak soldiers, offering them fruits from their gardens and asking questions about their homes. The humans wanted to know what the aliens ate, what kind of music they liked, and if they had families the Vrak had prepared for battle, screaming and fighting. But instead they found themselves in what felt like a friendly neighborhood. Party Hyejin brought her medical kit and noticed that some of the Vrak soldiers had old wounds and injuries. Without asking permission, she began treating their cuts with healing salves. The aliens were so surprised, they forgot to stop her. One young Vrak soldier started crying when Hyejin healed a scar on his arm that had been hurting him for years. So-young sat cross-legged on the grass and began teaching alien children how to make flower crowns. The young Vrak were fascinated by the colorful petals and the way humans could make beautiful things with just their hands. They had never seen anyone create something pretty just for the joy of making it. As the day went on, more and more humans came to meet their unexpected visitors. They brought blankets for the aliens to sit on, musical instruments to entertain them, and books to show them pictures of Earth. The humans treated the invasion like the most interesting thing that had happened in centuries. Commander Vex became more and more frustrated with each passing hour. His soldiers were supposed to be securing the landing zone and preparing for conquest. Instead, they were sitting in circles with humans, learning how to braid grass into ropes and listening to stories about how flowers grew. The alien commander tried to regain control by shouting orders and waving his weapons, but every time he raised his voice, a human would gently ask if he was feeling unwell or if he needed something to eat. The complete lack of fear or aggression from the humans made his threats seem meaningless by evening. The Vrak soldiers were sharing meals with human families around small campfires. The aliens told stories about their home planet, and the humans shared tales of Earth before the Great Peace. For the first time in their lives, the Vrak were experiencing something they had no word for: kindness from strangers. Commander Vex stood alone, watching his fierce warriors laugh and play games with human children. His empire had built its power on fear and violence. But these humans seemed to live in a world where such things did not exist. He began to wonder if his mighty fleet had landed on the wrong planet, or perhaps in the wrong universe entirely. The first day of what was supposed to be a quick and brutal conquest ended with Vrak soldiers sleeping peacefully in human homes as honored guests. They had expected to conquer Earth in a matter of hours. Instead, they found themselves more confused than they had ever been in their lives, wondering what kind of strange magic these smiling humans possessed. While Commander Vex expected the humans to spend their final week building weapons and walls, something completely different was happening across Earth. The humans began what they called the Great Awakening, but it was not what the aliens thought it would be. Instead of preparing for war, the humans were preparing to remember who they really were. Dongmin spent his days deep in the underground archives beneath the Great Library. These storage rooms had been sealed for thousands of years, and the dust on the locks was so thick it looked like gray snow. When he finally opened the ancient doors, the air that came out smelled like old paper and forgotten secrets. The books inside were written in languages so old that only a few scholars could read them. They told stories that seemed impossible about humans who could do things that defied the laws of physics. The records spoke of something called the deep strength, a power that awakened in humans during times of great need when everything they loved was threatened, according to the ancient texts. This power was not magic or technology, but something that lived in human blood and bones. It was described as the ability to become more than human when being human was not enough. The old writers called it different names: the fire within the sacred awakening, the God spark. But they all seemed to be talking about the same thing. So Young found her great-great-grandmother's journal hidden in a box in her family's attic. The pages were yellow with age and some of the ink had faded, but the words still told an amazing story. Her ancestor had lived during the last great conflicts before the Age of Peace, and she wrote about humans who could move faster than light. The journal described her great-great-grandmother's sister who could heal people by touching them. The woman could cure diseases that killed others and even bring people back from the edge of death. She could also shield entire buildings from explosions using nothing but her will and determination. The journal made it sound real, but So Young could hardly believe such things were possible. Hyojin made an even more amazing discovery in the medical archives. She found records showing that human DNA contained sequences of genetic code that had been dormant for 3,000 years. These sequences were labeled with terms like crisis enhancement and protective adaptation. The files suggested that under extreme stress, human bodies could transform in incredible ways. The genetic records showed that these dormant abilities were not random mutations but carefully designed systems built into every human being. They were like emergency programs waiting to be activated when they were desperately needed. The activation triggers were not technological but emotional, requiring what the scientists called righteous necessity. Throughout Earth, similar discoveries were being made in laboratories and libraries. Archaeologists found weapons that had been powered by human will alone. Engineers discovered blueprints for machines that responded to human thoughts and emotions. Artists uncovered paintings that seemed to move and change when viewed with the right kind of attention. Meanwhile, the Vrak soldiers continued to be confused by human behavior. Instead of building defenses, the humans were inviting more aliens to dinner parties and cultural exchanges. Some Vrak soldiers had started learning human languages and customs. Several had asked if they could stay on Earth permanently, even if the invasion was called off. Commander Vex received daily reports that made no military sense. His scouts reported that humans were gathering in large groups, but instead of training for battle, they were meditating and sharing stories. They were practicing breathing exercises and teaching each other techniques for focusing their minds. The alien commander watched human settlements through his ship's sensors, expecting to see the construction of bunkers and weapon factories. Instead, he saw people working in their gardens, planting new flowers and vegetables. He saw children playing games and adults creating art. The humans seemed to be preparing for a festival rather than a war. Some of his soldiers reported strange experiences while visiting human homes. They described feeling unusually peaceful and happy around the humans. Several Vrak officers mentioned that old injuries they had carried for years were starting to feel better after spending time with human doctors who used only gentle touches and soothing words. One of his captains told him about a human child who had looked at him with such pure kindness that he had started crying for the first time since childhood. The captain could not explain why, but being around the humans made him remember what it felt like to hope for something better than endless conquest. Commander Vex tried to focus on his mission, but found himself thinking about the tea Dong Min had offered him on that first day. The memory of that simple act of kindness kept returning to his mind even when he tried to push it away. He had tasted thousands of foods on dozens of worlds, but nothing had ever tasted quite like that. Tea. As the week progressed, the alien commander noticed changes in his own soldiers. They were laughing more than he had ever heard them laugh. They were asking questions about art and music instead of discussing battle tactics. Several had started adopting small human customs like saying please and thank you. The Vrak who had been assigned to spy on human activities were returning with reports that sounded more like travel journals than military intelligence. They described beautiful gardens, magnificent architecture, and humans who seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of everyone around them, including their supposed enemies. By the sixth day, Commander Vex realized that something fundamental was happening to his invasion force. His soldiers were not becoming weaker or less capable of fighting, but they were becoming less interested in fighting. They were discovering that there were other ways to live besides constant warfare and conquest. The alien commander stood in his command center, looking at displays showing human settlements across the planet. Not one defensive position had been built. Not one weapon had been manufactured. The humans were continuing to live their peaceful lives as if the threat of destruction was just another interesting challenge. To think about, Commander Vex had conquered 47 worlds, but he was beginning to suspect that Earth might conquer him instead. Not through force or trickery, but through something much more powerful. The humans were showing his soldiers, and maybe even himself, that there was a different way to exist in the universe. Tomorrow would be the 7th day, and he would have to decide whether to follow through on his threat to destroy the human cities. But looking at his soldiers who were learning to smile, and his officers who were discovering joy, he wondered if he would be able to give the order when the time came. The 7th day arrived with a beautiful sunrise that painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Commander Vex stood on the command bridge of his flagship, looking down at the largest human city where 2 million people lived, in peace and harmony. His weapons were charged and ready, capable of turning the entire metropolitan area into a crater of melted glass and burning metal. The alien commander had positioned his entire fleet in perfect formation above the city. Every ship's guns were aimed at the population centers below. His soldiers were at their battle stations waiting for the order to fire. The Vrak Empire had never failed to follow through on its threats, and today would not be the first time. But something felt different as Commander Vex looked at the displays showing the city below. The humans were not hiding in bunkers or fleeing to the countryside. They were going about their normal daily routines, tending their gardens, teaching their children, and creating beautiful works of art. It was as if they had forgotten that death was hanging over them like a dark cloud. The alien commander opened a communication channel expecting to receive final pleas for mercy or last-minute surrender offers. Instead, Dongmin's calm face appeared on the screen. The human was sitting in his garden sipping tea from the same cup he had offered to Commander Vex on that first day. His expression was peaceful, and he was still wearing that gentle smile that had unsettled the Vrak from the very beginning. Dongmin spoke softly, thanking Commander Vex for his patience during the past week. He explained that humanity had made their decision after much discussion and consideration. They would not fight, because they could not fight. Violence had been removed from their nature so completely that they had almost forgotten it had ever existed. The human continued speaking in the same calm tone he might use to discuss the weather. He said that humanity had remembered something very important about themselves. During the past 3,000 years, they had lived in peace because they had made a choice to lock away the deeper aspects of their nature. They had done this not because they were weak, but because they had become wise. Commander Vex listened with growing impatience. He had heard enough speeches and philosophical discussions. What he needed now was surrender, or the satisfaction of demonstrating his empire's power. He cut off the communication and began the firing sequence that would end 2 million human lives in a matter of seconds. The massive energy weapons of the Vrak fleet began to glow with destructive power, targeting computers locked onto schools, hospitals, and residential areas. The weapons, charged to full capacity, humming with enough energy to vaporize everything they touched. The other Vrak ships reported ready status, waiting only for their commander's final order. Commander Vex gave the command to fire and watched as brilliant beams of energy lanced down from his ships toward the defenseless city below. The beams were so bright they turned the morning sky white with their intensity. They carried enough destruction to end an entire civilization in moments. But then something impossible happened. The energy beams simply stopped, not deflected by shields or absorbed by some kind of barrier, but stopped as if they had hit something invisible and completely immovable. The deadly light hung in the air halfway between the ships and the city like frozen lightning. Commander Vex stared at his displays, trying to understand what he was seeing. His weapons were functioning perfectly, but their energy was not reaching its targets. The beams seemed to be encountering some kind of resistance that his sensors could not detect or measure down in the city below. The humans looked up at the frozen energy beams with expressions of calm understanding. They did not seem surprised or frightened by what was happening. Instead, they appeared to be waiting for something, as if this was all part of a plan they had known about for a long time. Then the real miracle began. The 2 million humans in the city started to glow with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from within their bodies. The light was not the harsh glare of technology, but something organic and alive that pulsed gently like heartbeats and breathing. The light spread from person to person, creating connections that looked like golden threads stretching across the entire city. Soon every human was linked to every other human in a web of luminescence that grew brighter and more beautiful with each passing moment. Commander Vex felt his hands start to shake as he watched something that should have been impossible. The humans below were not just glowing, they were transforming into something beyond his understanding. They remained human in appearance, but they had become something much more powerful. His sensors began registering energy readings. That made no sense. The humans were generating power levels that rivaled his fleet's reactors, but they were doing it without any visible technology. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Vrak Empire's databases. The frozen energy beams from his weapons began to change color, shifting from destructive white to the same warm golden light that surrounded the humans. The deadly energy was being transformed into something else, something that felt safe and welcoming rather than threatening. And violent Commander Vex tried to fire again, but the same thing happened. His weapon's energy was caught and changed before it could reach the city. His most powerful destructive force was being turned into light that made the human city even more beautiful than before. Throughout his fleet, similar reports came in from other ships. None of their weapons could harm the humans. Every blast was transformed into more of the golden light that now covered the city like a protective dome. The Vrak Empire's most advanced military technology had been rendered completely harmless. But the most disturbing reports came from his soldiers stationed throughout the city. They were not being attacked or threatened, but they were laying down their weapons. Anyway, human civilians were approaching the Vrak warriors with that same gentle smile offering comfort and healing. His soldiers reported that the humans were somehow taking away their pain, not just physical injuries, but emotional wounds that had been carried for years. Vrak warriors who had known nothing but violence and conquest their entire lives were experiencing something. They had no words for compassion and acceptance from their supposed enemies. Commander Vex realized that his invasion had failed. Not because his weapons were inadequate or his strategy was flawed. It had failed because he had encountered something the Vrak Empire had never faced before, a force that could transform destruction into creation and enemies into family. Humans had not defeated his fleet, they had made his fleet irrelevant. They had shown that there was something more powerful than the ability to destroy, and that was the wisdom to transform what others meant for harm into something beautiful and life-giving. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about humans. The golden light surrounding the city began to pulse with a rhythm that felt familiar, like a heartbeat or the sound of breathing. The light grew stronger and started to spread beyond the city limits, reaching out across the planet like the sunrise of a new age. Hee-Jin was working in her medical center when the awakening began. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, as if sunlight was flowing through her veins. Suddenly her senses exploded with new information. She could see colors that had no names, hear sounds from across the city, and feel the electromagnetic fields generated by every living thing on Earth. Her eyes could now perceive the entire spectrum of light from radio waves to gamma rays. The world looked completely different when seen with awakened vision. She could see the health and emotional state of every person around her, glowing like colored auras that told stories about their lives and feelings. But more amazing than her enhanced senses was her newfound ability to heal with just a touch. Hee-Jin placed her hands on a Vrak soldier who had been injured in a battle years ago. The alien's wounds closed instantly, and scars that had caused him pain for decades simply faded away. So Young discovered that her consciousness was no longer limited to her physical body. She could exist in multiple places at the same time, appearing beside frightened Vrak soldiers throughout the fleet, not to threaten them but to offer comfort and understanding. She could speak to them in their own language even though she had never learned it. Her awakened mind could access information that seemed to come from the collective memory of all humanity. She understood things about the universe that she had never studied and could solve problems that had puzzled scientists for generations. The knowledge flowed through her like water through a stream. Dong Min felt himself becoming connected to every human on Earth. Their thoughts and emotions flowed through him like a vast, gentle river. Through this connection, he understood the full scope of what humanity was becoming. They were not turning into warriors or conquerors, they were becoming something far more profound. They had become a force of nature itself, as unstoppable as gravity and as nurturing as sunlight. They could not be fought any more than someone could fight the wind or argue with the ocean. They simply were, and their existence changed everything around them. The awakened humans discovered they could manipulate matter and energy with their thoughts. Walls that had been damaged by the alien weapons repaired themselves instantly. Broken objects became whole again. Polluted water became clean and pure. The very air seemed to become fresher and more life-giving. But perhaps most remarkably, the humans found they could share their awakening with others. When they touched the Vrak soldiers, the aliens began to experience the same expansion of consciousness. The cruel programming that had made them into conquerors started to dissolve, replaced by an understanding of their own deeper nature. The Vrak had been raised to believe that the universe was a hostile place where only the strong survived. They had been taught that kindness was weakness and that taking from others was the only way to have enough. But the awakened humans showed them a different truth through their connection to the humans. The Vrak soldiers began to remember parts of themselves they had forgotten. They had once been a species of artists and philosophers before war and conquest consumed their civilization. They had created beautiful music and stunning architecture before they learned to build weapons and warships. Commander Vex felt the change beginning in himself as well. The anger and fear that had driven him for centuries were still there, but they no longer controlled him. He could feel the pain that had made him into a conqueror. And for the first time in his life, he understood that the pain could be healed. His red eyes began to show different colors as his awakened vision developed. He could see the beauty in things he had never noticed before. The way light reflected off water, the graceful movement of birds in flight, the incredible complexity and wonder of a simple flower. All of this had been invisible to him when he was focused only on conquest and destruction. Throughout the Vrak fleet, soldiers were laying down their weapons not in surrender, but because the need for weapons had simply vanished. When beings could communicate directly, mind to mind, and heal each other's wounds with a touch, what purpose did violence serve? The humans reached out across space to other worlds that the Vrak had conquered. They did not travel in ships but sent their consciousness across the galaxy instantaneously. On planet after planet, oppressed populations felt the touch of awakened human minds, offering them hope and the knowledge that freedom was possible. The enslaved species began to awaken to their own hidden potentials. Each race discovered abilities that had been dormant within them for generations. Some could communicate with plants and animals. Others could manipulate gravity or phase in and out of physical reality. Each species had its own unique gifts waiting to be rediscovered. Commander Vex found himself standing in Dongmin's garden, though he could not remember walking. There the human was still sitting in the same spot, still holding the same cup of tea that he had offered on that first day. But now Vex could truly see the garden, and it was the most beautiful place he had ever experienced. Every plant glowed with its own inner light, telling the story of its growth and purpose. The flowers sang in harmonies that touched his soul. The very soil seemed alive with possibilities. The garden was not just a collection of plants, it was a living artwork created through love and patience. Dongmin offered him the tea again, and this time Commander Vex accepted. He sat down on the soft grass, something he had never done in his entire military career. The tea tasted like peace itself, warm and comforting with flavors that seemed to heal old wounds in his spirit. For the first time in his life, the alien commander felt what the humans called joy. It was not the satisfaction of victory or the pleasure of conquest, but something much deeper and more lasting. It was the simple happiness of being alive in a universe full of wonder and beauty. The awakening continued to spread as more humans remembered their true nature, and more aliens discovered their own hidden gifts. The galaxy was transforming not through conquest or force, but through the sharing of consciousness and the healing power of unconditional love. The transformation that began on Earth spread across the galaxy like ripples on a cosmic pond. But unlike the violent expansion of the Vrak Empire, this change moved through connection and understanding rather than force and fear. The awakened humans did not conquer other worlds, they healed them. Within days of the awakening, planets that had been enslaved for generations began to throw off their chains, not through violent rebellion, but through a collective realization that slavery was simply incompatible with awakened consciousness. When both the oppressed and the oppressors understood their true nature, the entire system of domination collapsed naturally. Hyejin established the first Galactic Restoration Center in what had once been a Vrak military base. The facility became a place where beings from across the Empire came to heal from generations of trauma. Her enhanced abilities allowed her to work with alien biologies she had never encountered before, finding ways to repair damage that went far deeper than physical wounds. She could heal the deep psychological scars that violence leaves behind, helping former warriors remember what it felt like to create instead of destroy. Her patients included Vrak soldiers who had forgotten how to feel joy, enslaved populations who had lost hope, and even members of other conquering species who had built their identities around causing harm. The healing process was not always easy. Many beings had to confront painful memories and acknowledge the harm they had caused or suffered. But Hyejin's presence made it possible for them to face these truths without being destroyed by shame or despair. She showed them that healing was always possible, no matter how deep the wounds. So Young became an ambassador to the stars, her consciousness able to travel instantly to any world that called for help. She did not bring human solutions to alien problems, because she had learned that every species needed to find their own path to peace. And awakening her role was to help them remember who they truly were, beneath the layers of fear and conditioning, on a water world inhabited by beings who communicated through color changes in their skin. So Young helped them rediscover their ability to share emotions directly through their natural camouflage. On a desert planet where crystalline beings had forgotten how to sing, she taught them to remember the music that once held their society together. Each world she visited began to bloom, with new possibilities as its inhabitants awakened to abilities they had forgotten they possessed. The galaxy became a vast network of interconnected consciousness, with each species contributing their unique gifts to the growing tapestry of galactic awareness. The Vrak Empire did not fall in the traditional sense. There was no final battle, no conquest, no dramatic surrender. Instead, it transformed from within, as more and more Vrak remembered their true nature. Former weapons factories were converted into art studios and research centers dedicated to understanding the deeper mysteries of consciousness. Vrak warriors became gardeners and teachers, using their strength to build rather than destroy. Their natural resilience and determination made them excellent protectors of the weak and healers of the damaged. They discovered that their aggressive instincts could be channeled into passionate creativity and fierce protection of beauty. Commander Vex became something he had never imagined, possible a student. He spent his days learning from Dongmin and other human teachers not about military tactics or conquest strategies, but about patience, compassion, and the art of growing things. His scarred hands that had once held only weapons learned to tend delicate flowers. The alien commander discovered he had a talent for music that had been buried under centuries of military conditioning. His deep voice that had once terrified enemies across the galaxy now sang lullabies to children and hymns of gratitude for the beauty of existence. His red eyes that had glowed with anger now sparkled with wonder at the miracle of life. Other former conquerors underwent similar transformations. A Vrak admiral who had destroyed entire star systems became a master architect designing buildings that enhanced the natural beauty of alien landscapes. A general who had enslaved populations became a teacher, helping young beings discover their own unique gifts and potentials. The changes were not limited to individuals. Entire cultures began to evolve in ways that would have seemed impossible. Just months before species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they shared common dreams and values. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources began to heal as awakened beings learned to work with nature instead of against it. Trade between worlds shifted from the extraction of wealth to the exchange of knowledge and beauty. Starships that had once carried weapons and soldiers now transported artists and teachers. Music and poetry flowed between star systems, along with scientific discoveries and philosophical insights. The awakened humans continued to play a special role in this galactic transformation, but they did not seek to rule or control. Instead, they served as bridges between species, helping different forms of consciousness understand and appreciate each other. They were translators of the heart, enabling beings who thought in completely different ways to find common ground. Dongmin often sat in his garden, now expanded to include plants from dozens of worlds, watching ships arrive, filled with beings eager to learn about peace and awakening. The sight of former enemies working together to create beauty still amazed him, even though he had helped make it possible. He remembered the morning when the black ships first appeared in Earth's sky, and how he had offered tea to a terrifying alien commander. That simple act of kindness had started a chain reaction that transformed an entire galaxy. It showed him that even the smallest gesture of love could have consequences beyond imagination. The galaxy was still full of challenges and problems to solve, but now there was hope. Beings who had spent lifetimes focused on survival and conquest were learning to dream of possibilities they had never imagined. Wars that had raged for centuries ended not in victory for one side, but in understanding between former enemies. Children were being born into a universe where cooperation was more valued than competition, where creativity was more admired than destructiveness, where the ability to heal was considered more important than the ability to harm. These young beings would grow up knowing that the galaxy was their home, and that every star system was part of their extended family. The smile that had so confused Commander Vex on that first day had become a common sight throughout the galaxy. It was the expression of beings who understood their true nature and their connection to all life. It was the face of a universe that was finally learning to love itself. And at the center of it all, humanity continued to tend their garden planet, showing by example that the greatest strength was not the power to destroy but the wisdom to nurture and protect, that 3,000 years of peace had not made them weak, but had prepared them for their greatest adventure, becoming teachers of peace to an entire galaxy, ready to awaken. The next morning, Commander Vex decided he needed to take control of the situation. Before his soldiers forgot they were supposed to be conquerors, he demanded to speak with Earth's military leaders, but the humans just looked confused. When he asked for their army, they tilted their heads like he was speaking a foreign language. A woman named Yoon Suk, who had gray hair and kind eyes, explained to the alien commander that humans had not had armies for 3,000 years. She said it gently, like she was explaining something obvious to a child who had forgotten. The concept of having groups of people whose job was to hurt other people seemed as strange to her as if Vex had asked for their department of flying elephants. Commander Vex grew more frustrated and demanded to speak with whoever was in charge of the planet. The humans discussed this among themselves for a while, and then Dongmin explained that important decisions were made when everyone got together to talk about them. If Commander Vex had something important to say to humanity, he could do it that evening when everyone gathered in the big plaza in the center of the city. That evening, thousands of humans came to hear what the alien leader had to say. They did not come with weapons or angry faces. They came with notebooks and recording devices like they were attending an interesting lecture at a university. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to get a better view, and vendors sold snacks and drinks too. The crowd. Commander Vex stood on a platform in the center of the plaza. His massive form cast long shadows in the warm evening light. His armor gleamed and his weapons hummed with power. He looked every bit the terrifying conqueror he was supposed to be. But the humans looked at him with the same interest they might show for a visiting professor or a traveling musician. The alien commander began his speech the same way he had on 47 other worlds. He announced that he represented the mighty Vrak Empire which had conquered planets across the galaxy. He declared that Earth now belonged to the Vrak, and that humans would serve as slaves or be destroyed. The crowd listened politely, some taking notes as if this was valuable information they wanted to remember. When Commander Vex finished his ultimatum, something unexpected happened. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand like a student asking a question in class. Commander Vex was so surprised he actually called on her, without thinking. The woman stood up slowly and asked in a voice full of genuine concern why the Vrak felt they needed to conquer other planets. Her question was not a challenge or an argument. She seemed truly worried about the aliens, like a grandmother, concerned about troubled grandchildren. She asked if the Vrak were hungry or homeless or afraid. She wondered if something terrible had happened to them that made them feel they had to take things from other people. Other humans began asking similar questions. A young man wondered if the Vrak home planet was in danger and if Earth could help somehow. A teacher asked if Vrak children were safe and well-educated. An artist wanted to know what kind of beauty the Vrak created when they were not busy conquering things. These questions completely derailed Commander Vex's prepared speech. He had expected demands for mercy or negotiations about surrender terms. Instead, he was being interviewed about his people's well-being and emotional state. The humans seemed more concerned about helping the Vrak than saving themselves. More offers of help began coming from the crowd. If the Vrak needed food, Earth had plenty of everything. If they needed homes, there was room for everyone to live comfortably. If they were curious about human culture, they were welcome to stay as long as they wanted to learn. The humans began discussing practical matters like housing arrangements and dietary requirements for their alien guests. Commander Vex found himself struggling to maintain his threatening posture when faced with such overwhelming hospitality. His voice cracked slightly as he tried to get back to his ultimatum. He announced that humanity had 7 days to prepare their defenses. After that, he would demonstrate the power of the Vrak Empire by destroying Earth's largest cities. The crowd received this information thoughtfully. Many humans nodded, as if he had just shared an interesting piece of scientific data. Others began discussing among themselves how they might better accommodate their visitors' needs during the week-long stay. Several people approached the platform to invite Commander Vex and his officers to dinner at their homes. An old man with a white beard asked if the Vrak had special dietary needs or food allergies. A young mother offered to organize playdates between human and Vrak children. A group of artists wanted to know if they could paint portraits of the aliens to help them remember this historic first meeting. Between their species, Commander Vex left the gathering feeling more confused than ever. His threat of destruction had been received like an interesting weather report. His ultimatum had been treated like a scheduling announcement. His entire speech had somehow been transformed from a declaration of conquest into a cultural exchange program. Back at his ship, the alien commander tried to make sense of what had happened. His soldiers reported similar experiences throughout the day. Human civilians had been approaching them with gifts and invitations. Families had offered to adopt young Vrak soldiers who seemed lonely. Scientists had asked for permission to study Vrak technology. Not to copy it, but to understand how it worked. One of his lieutenants reported that a human child had asked him why he looked so sad. The Vrak officer had been thinking about his own children back on the home planet. Children he had not seen in 10 years because of constant warfare. The human child had offered to draw him a picture to cheer him up, and now the fierce alien warrior carried that drawing in his armor pocket. Commander Vex realized that his carefully planned invasion was turning into something he had no experience with. The humans were not responding to his threats with fear or anger. They were responding with something much more dangerous to his mission. They were responding with love. And the Vrak Empire had no defense against such a weapon.